And what this is focused on is when you decide to use Communicator, how are you going to build up your system around Communicator, and how are you going to integrate Communicator into an already existing solution? So, a couple of things we want to think about when we decide to use Communicator is how we're going to host the application. So the first step is platform. So we run on both Linux and Windows, and a number of different Windows server versions and distributions. Now, in general, we recommend using Linux just for the ease of deployment and working with, but we do have people that are using Windows, so if you're already a Windows shop, there's no problem with that. The next thing you're going to want to decide on is whether you want to use your own machines versus hosted services. Now, there's a couple of things that kind of go into this, and each have their own advantages and disadvantages. So if you're going to be using your own machines, the major disadvantage is that you're going to have to provide all that infrastructure yourself. And you can imagine during times of increased usage, like if you just put out like a press release or something and traffic is going to be high, you need to make sure that you have the resources to really back those requests. Now, on the other hand, if you're using hosted services, the scaling part is pretty much handled for you. The service is going to provide that backing to allow your system to scale. The disadvantage to using the hosting services is that you're going to be paying per minute or per hour that you're using the system, and you're going to have a little bit less flexibility over the hardware that is backing your installation. And we sort of touched on the scalability here in the sense of who is responsible for scaling. So obviously with your own machines, you're going to be responsible for that. For the hosted services, they're going to be responsible for that. But over time, the cost could increase. So, in reality, you need to figure out, what the use case is for your own application compared to the cost of using your own machines or hosted services. Now, in some cases, you don't have a choice. Like, you may have a company mandate where you're going to have to use, an intranet or something like that, and hosting something on an external cloud service isn't possible. So the good thing is Communicator can run in any section or any type of environment, but before you commit to one, you need to really think about what it is you're going to be encountering. And depending on how you choose a hosting solution, it's going to also affect how you deal with storage. Now, storage is a really important aspect of a Communicator deployment. And the main thing we want to stress here is that for streaming, we do have a requirement of random access. So if we think back to how we described the viewer in the sense of that we're going to be streaming the data that you can see first, and we're going to sort that by size, you can imagine we're going to have to be jumping around on the file system to grab that relevant data. So what that means is that the model file has to be available to the streaming application at the start, and we have to be able to seek it randomly. So you can imagine a scenario where, I want to download a file from a database or from another web server. I would have to make sure that that entire file is available on that disk before I start. If the file is incomplete, we can't start streaming. Now that kind of ties into this next point, network storage. So this is a popular solution for a lot of companies that have these internal networks. They use network storage, and every machine can mount those network drives and have access to read-write on those systems. Now, network storage is a fine solution. However, there is latency involved. So as we're seeking through the file, the network storage is going to be a little bit slower in most cases than having that data locally. So you're going to want to keep that in mind when you're doing your conversions and placing these files in network storage, that it will have some overhead. Now the next thing we want to talk about is a storage service, and we have S3 noted here. There's a number of different storage services, but S3 is one that's very popular, and the way this works is that you dump files into this storage service, and each file gets back a handle when you save it. Now, when you go to view that model, you would store in your database that handle to the file, and you would have to pull that file down out of S3. Now remember, we need to have the complete file available. So in order to start streaming with a storage service backend, we're going to have to wait for that entire file to download before we can start. And if we're using SCZ, which is the compressed stream cache format, we're also going to have to wait for that file to decompress. So you can imagine that while the storage service is convenient, that we can just place many files in it at once, and it's very easy to get them out, we do have to pay that overhead of waiting for it to stream or to transfer all the way down to our local viewer. And finally, we have a database. So a database is going to be a similar idea to the storage service, in the sense that we are going to be storing this model data in some centralized store, and we'll have to query it out. So again, it's going to follow the same pattern as the S3 storage service, in that we're going to have to extract the entire data out, and then we're going to have to decompress it for using a SCZ. So in terms of the file formats that we support, if you think back to the SC file, by default, uncompressed is this directory of 5 or 6 files. That's well suited for things like network storage, in that we can just open file handles to each file and stream it in. For the storage service or database, that's a little more problematic, because we have to download all of those files at once. Using the SCZ, since it's only one file, storing it in the storage service or the database is a little more convenient, because it's just one file, we can easily get it out. So that's a sort of overview of the different storage considerations that we're going to need to consider before we decide on how we're going to deploy Communicator.